Okay, it's Franco Ucci. Welcome to Thursdays with Franco, where we talk things autonomous and Apex on how to do more interesting things as quickly as possible with data. And special guest today is Chris Spierings, who's going to be talking to us about data loading with Apex. Hey, Chris.
Hey Franco, how you going?
I'm going well. And you're in Brisbane. It's a beautiful day there by today, a little bit warm, and I'm
Yep,
here in Adelaide.
excellent, excellent. Yeah, I thought I'd do this topic because it's something I've played around with Apex for a fairly long time, and it's something I've never really had to do up until very recently. And that's load data into an Apex app. And the reason this came about was my boss. He wanted to track some work that the team was doing, and he gets this spreadsheet that comes in like once a week from his BizOps people, and he needs to talk about it the next morning in a management call. He needs a quick update from everyone in the team. And that's the perfect Apex app, right? So instead of emailing that spreadsheet out to the whole team and getting them to fill it in and sending it back and collating it, we just put it into Apex and, using the data loading wizard, and I'll just show you here. We quickly created an app. So, so in Apex in my workshop, I can click on the utilities, and I can click on data workshop, and I can load data and just upload a spreadsheet and then quickly create an application. So I think a lot of us have done that. But the challenge came that he would get a new version of the spreadsheet every single week. And so he needed to refresh that data back into that Apex application. And we couldn't really go through this again because there's data inside, the comments that the rest of his team would make in there. We wanted to keep that. And so some of the data was changing. We'd have new entries coming into that spreadsheet. We'd have old ones coming out. And so we needed to just quickly write a data loading capability into this application. So I did that. And then I thought maybe we'll have a bit of a talk about it on your Thursdays with Franco about how to do data loading, because it can be quite simple and there can be a few little tricks. So I suppose we'll get into it. And just before we get into it, I had a question from someone a few weeks ago. They were asking me around applications that they may develop in their workspace, and you can see in this workspace here, I've got two applications, one called employees and one called preamps, and they needed to be running one application, and then they wanted to jump across to the other application seamlessly without having to re-log in. So, going through that login page. And Apex provides a way of doing that. And I just thought I'd quickly show you before we get into the data loading. So if I was to open my employees application and just go to shared components and then look at authorization schemes, this is my, not authorization, sorry, I want to look at authentication schemes. And if I look at the authentication scheme that I'm currently using, and I scroll down here to session sharing, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Yeah. And if I change that to workspace sharing, by default, it sets to application, so no sharing. If I change that to workspace sharing, and then I do the same on the other application, what that does is if I'm logged into one application, it will hand the session over to the new application when I click on it. And it will be able to run that new application without actually having to log in again. And the way you might want to link these two together, if you go into your shared components and have a look at it, anywhere on there, I put it in the navbar list. So I've created a link to this other application in here. And all I do is just call that application and I pass across the session to that application, and it'll call that URL and it'll run that application as if by magic without having to log in. So you can see I'm in the preamps application here, and there's that entry I've made, and I just go across to the employees back again. Nice and simple. Okay. So I just thought I'd quickly share that.
So there's the tip before the tip that you've just given us. Yeah, you've given us the tip before the tip. You just reminded us about, hey, Apex has got the built-in, easy to use data loading capability.
Yep.
And while we're doing lots of Apex type of activity, it can be a pain in the butt having to log in from one app to another app in the same workspace. So
Yep.
you actually showed us by going into shared components, you can actually do the workspace sharing under the authentication capability there, and just pop the URL in the nav bar list. That's I will say I do have that need every now and again, and that is quite a handy tip. So thank you for the unexpected tip. So we're now going to get into what you're talking about is, hey, it's not unusual. You've built your app on your data set, and every now and again, you're going to need to do either something like a refresh or an append of data. And you're going to take us through how you do this.
Yeah, sure. So I've got a mate who loves spreadsheets. So he creates spreadsheets about everything, and I got this spreadsheet off him. And this is one called preamps. He's a guitarist, and here's the spreadsheet, which has a whole list of preamps that you can get. And I went through that process that I just talked about before of going into Apex and just loading this data in and creating an application based on that spreadsheet. And I can edit these things if I wanted to. And what I thought I'd do is I'd quickly create a data loading wizard to, if I want to just append more spreadsheet data into here. So this is what the app looks like. I can go in to my application builder, and under shared components, I can create a data load definition here under data sources. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to create a new one. And I'm going to create it from scratch.
Okay.
And I just realized there's a bit of a flaw here because I'm sharing my my browser, but I'm not sharing my desktop. So I'm going to quickly stop sharing, and I'm going to share my desktop so you can see if I have a spreadsheet open, you can see that hopefully okay now. So preamp data load, I'm going to call it. And I just select the table that I want to load into it. I can select the table or a view. You can see here it's got views as well, but I'm going to pick the table that I'm wanting to load data into. And the target is a table or a collection. So that's just something to be aware of. You don't have to load this data straight into a table. You can load it into an Apex collection if that's what you want to do.
What's an Apex collection? What is it?
So Apex collections are a way that Apex makes it very easy to handle, I suppose, data that's transient. So if you think about things like temporary tables that database people are quite familiar with, they're really good to handle that transient data. But the trouble with when you're using Apex or things like that is your database session may change a little bit, and you'll lose that temporary table because your database session changes. So Apex allows you to have a temporary data store that's kind of persistent with your session. When your session ends, it gets cleaned up.
Right.
We can do a whole session on Apex collections if you want, but they're a very neat thing. So what it's asking me to do is I've told it what the table is that I want to upload. Now it's asking me for a sample of my file. So I've got, let me just get a sample. I'm going to download this as a CSV. And I can just go back over here. And I'll just, let me just drag that file in. And I've dragged that file in. And so that was just a download of the actual data out of the table itself. And what that's done is it's given me the columns from the CSV file, and then it's telling me what that's going to map to in the table itself. So these are all the rows, and so that's done a nice job. And I can, if it's made a mistake here, I can change it. Right, so I can say, no, you got that wrong. Yeah. I'm also going to specify the primary key, and I don't have a synthetic primary key on this. It's just spreadsheet data, but I'm using the make in the model. That should be pretty unique as the primary key.
Yeah.
So then I've got the option to create that data load definition, or I can create it and I can go straight in and add a page. But what I'll just do initially is I'll just say create the data load definition, and then we'll come back and create the page later. So there it is.
I actually like the thing too. You had the format mask, the separators and that sort of thing. So it's got some little, simple transformational or formatting things there. I know Stuart Coggins, who's on this call, loves the way in which it deals with dates. Makes it really easy to, how dates come in different formats, and that it tends to pick that up automatically without having to do anything. Yeah, it does indeed. It does indeed. So what I did was I created that, and I'm sitting here and I'm looking at that definition now, and I can go in and edit it. And I just thought we just go through and have a look at what it's doing. So, this is our table that we define. Now, the loading method is very important. So we can do three things. We can either append this data to the existing table, or we can do a merge, or we can do a replace. So append obviously means create new records in there. Replace means delete everything from the table and just put this data in there, right? Merge is the interesting one. So merge is going to say, if there's a match on the primary key, I'm going to do an update on that table. If there's no match, then I'm going to do an insert. So that's pretty good. And then what to do with error handling. So if we hit an error, do we want to stop? Do we want to ignore the error? We can log that error into a collection, or we can log it into an error log. And we'll have a look at that a little bit later. And then we have, this is the data profile that we created. So this is telling us our columns. And like you mentioned before, we can do transformations on this data. And we'll look at that a little bit more detail when we get a little bit more complicated. It's telling us what that data type's going to be. It's going to be a varchar 250. And then these are those transformation rules. So you can do trims, or you can replace characters. You can change the case of it. You can do regex, replace, or a null if. So these are some of the simple transformations that you can do on the data as you're bringing it in. And, we said this is one of the primary key columns, and do we make that visible? So that's all done. So let's apply those changes, and we're going to do a merge. So let's apply those changes. And then we can go back to our application and let's create a page. And this is really complicated. We just click data loading, and we'll give it a name called load. And we give it that definition that we created. And we just say, this is going to be a file, maximum file size, create the page. And that's it. It's done. So if I refresh that page now, I can see that it's created that new page called load. And what it's asking me to do is to drag and drop. It's going to support a CSV or a text file. I happen to have a little update here already. So I've got a spreadsheet here, and I've got some stuff that I want to update in there, and I'll make that $200, and I'll save that, and let me just drag that file in. And what it's done is it's kind of staged that data in there, so it's read out of the file. It's got those 4 records that we have in there, and then it's giving you the option to load that data. So I load that data, and it's done it. Data load finished, 4 rows processed. So if I was to go back to my view here of those things, that's all done. So that all works nicely, for simple files. There is some, I suppose, some nuances to this. So say if I was to have a look at this file again, and if I was to go back to that definition,
So here's my definition. If I was to look at the columns, and I can see here, price is a number. So what happens if, and it's a number because it's a number in the database. What happens if I was to change that and put a typo in there, 200A? All right. Drag and drop that in, and then you can see that column in there. It's supposed to be a number. It's not going to be happy about this, so it's come up with an error, right?
Yeah.
And this is kind of one of the limitations that you have if you're kind of just using this to do simple transformations. You're going to have some problems. So you've got to be wary of that. Now, what we do have the capacity to do is we can, when we log that, what we can do is we can log the error into a collection or an error log, and we can then have a look at that and get an idea of what's gone wrong with that data load. Okay, and we'll have a look at that in the next example. So that's it. That's a very simple data load. Now, if we have a look at something a little bit more complicated, and we have a look at that sample schema that we have, for employees. And so employees is a table, and it has a number of,
So Chris, before we jump onto that, the thing which I like about what you've done for me is that if I'm going to do this, it's really about understanding your data and how it's going to map to a table, what you're likely to want to do with it. Like you said, append, merge, replace, any sort of transformational things. And you've shown me that there's effectively 2 steps. The first step is to do the data load definition, where you can manifest that capability. So that's step 1. And then step 2, which is the easy thing, is be able to create a page where you can add that. So it's those 2 steps. Now, for someone like myself, I would tend to actually go, hey, I want to do some data loading, and I would have probably just added it and not been aware I need to actually create the data load definition first. So you've actually helped me appreciate I need to think about my data first and the journey I'm going to take it on. And there's this data load definition capability or library that I can then reuse in a few other places.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, so what I'm going to show you now is an example where it's maybe not so straightforward. So this example here with this this employees data, we have a data set that has a number of different data types, but it also has lookup tables. So we have a jobs table, we have a locations table, and we also reference a manager in this table, which references back to itself. So you can see here we've got, if we have a look at the data in here, we've got an employee with their ID. They've got a job ID which references a jobs table. They've got a manager that references back to itself. So there's no name in there. It's just a number, and same with department. So we're going to have a look at how to do some data loading in this example, where we might want to be doing updates or merges into here. So let's have a look. So I've pre-created our data load definitions, and I thought we'd just go through and inspect them. So in here, I've got 2 data load definitions. I've got one called salary review, which we'll have a look at in a moment, but this one's called employee data load. And what I'm doing in here is I'm doing a merge on the employees table. When I hit an error, I'm going to stop. And if I have a look at the data load profile, so this one gets a little bit more tricky. If I was to have a look at my employees view here, you can see what it looks like. And what we've done is we've got, instead of job, we've got, we've translated that to the actual name, and same with the department. And anyone who's going to maybe doing an update in a spreadsheet won't be using numbers. They'll probably be using like job titles. So we need to kind of translate that name back to a job title. We need to, do the same with the department, and so on. And I've also just created some columns on the end here, which are updated by triggers, so we can see when updates are done on this table. So let's have a look at that data load. So if I was to have a look at employee data, get rid of that. So here's some employee data that we may have that we're going to load into here. And you can see here, I've got these jobs are represented as like, the full description rather than a number. Same with the manager. The manager's name is Stephen King, and it's done that way, and the department they work in. And the trouble is that they're numbers in the database, and we need to do some translation. So what we've done here is we've created this data definition, and I've come along and edited it later. And if I was to have a look at the job ID, I've gotten that column job ID, and I've appended underscore load to it. So this is just to say this is a different column. We're not actually going to load it. We're going to use it for a lookup. And I've created this lookup in here. And so this is loaded as a varchar2 now instead of a number. And if I scroll down here and have a look at my data definitions, I've created a job ID, which is a lookup. And I do that by adding a column over here. So I click on add column, and then I define this new column as a lookup. And if I click on here in job ID, I can see that. So I've got a column type lookup. The data type's number. So the data coming in was a character. This column is going to be a number. And I do that by referencing another table called jobs. And I'm going to return job ID. I'm going to look it up on job title. And that's the column I'm going to use. It gets a little bit confusing the first time you do it, but just remember, so this is a column that has a lookup table, and we've got to do that transformation of that lookup from one column to another. So I hope that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. So it comes back down to understanding your data, and chances are, if you're thinking spreadsheets, there's different V lookups and things like that. When you're looking at tables and relations, you're actually realizing the relationships between the data, and how do you enrich it so it becomes meaningful for people. Got it.
Yeah. And so, so like I said, the first time you try this, it's going to be confusing. And my suggestion would be, if you hop on YouTube and you find the Apex Developers YouTube channel, they've got a little video on how to do this, which will walk you through it. So that's the way I'd recommend people to go after this. They want to actually create that. So there you go. And I've done this on a few different columns. So all those columns that reference another column, I've created these lookups. You can see them down here. I rename these ones load. And then as I go down, I've created a job ID, a manager ID, and department ID. They're all lookups. So if we were to go to our employees now, and we were to click on load employee, and I don't know what this one is, update. There.
I think that was.
So I've got some employees here, and I'm going to. You'll see here, like these are 3 employees. So 101, 102, 103. These are going to be updates. So we're going to update their jobs, their salaries, everything that's in here is going to get updated. And then I've added myself as a new employee. I don't have an employee ID. And so hopefully it's going to create one, and I've got a trigger on that table, which does it hopefully. So let's click on load. So it's done it, 4 rows processed. Excellent. I'll go back to employees now, and I do a search for myself. I can see myself. I was created in there 9 seconds ago. So there we go. That's a data load with some lookups and some transformations. And then quickly, just finally, let's do one for a salary review. And the reason I've done this is I just wanted to demonstrate that you don't have to load directly into a table. You can actually stage this data somewhere and then do some work on it as well. And you don't have to load all columns, right? You can pick a subset of columns that you may want to update. So in this example, we've got the boss is going to do a review of people's salaries and going to give some people an adjusted salary. And I've created a data load definition called salary review. If I was to have a look at that profile, I'm picking in two columns, one employee ID, one salary. And I'm mapping them to, I'm not mapping them straight into that table. What I'm doing is I'm loading them in a table called salary review because I want a two-stage process. I want to load them in, I want to make sure everything's right, and then I'm going to give people their pay rises or pay cuts or whatever. I've also created an error collection called salary load error. So we'll have a bit of a look and see what might happen there as well. So let's go through and have a look here. And I'm going to do a salary review. And if I have a look at this table here, I've got 3 people who are going to get salary reviews, and this is going to be, let's give this person, say, let's give them a pay cut, $7,000, and this one can have a pay rise of 18, and Harold will leave at 7,000. Drag that in. There are 3 employees that are going to get a review, and I'm going to load this data. So this data is going to go into a staging table. So what I've done is I've loaded it into a staging table, and then I've done a comparison against the employees. So this is just a pre-check or a sanity check before I click on allocate. So this person here, Lex, is getting a $1,000 pay rise, and he's happy. This one here is getting a $10,000 drop in pay, so a bit sad. This one's losing $2,000. And so all I've done is I've just done a join on employees and on that new data that I've loaded, and I'm just doing a sanity check. And because I'm doing a sanity check, I can do anything I want now in Apex. So if I click on allocate, I've just got a thing saying, you know, you're going to give someone a pay cut. Are you sure you want to do this? And we'll go, yes, let's do that. So that's done. So there you go. And so all that's done, that salary review, it's only affected one column in the database, and it's been the salary. So just because you're doing data loading doesn't mean you have to update every single column. You can pick or choose. So I hope that makes sense and gives people some ideas on how they might handle data loading in Apex.
Chris, thank you for lots of sharing with what's possible with Apex, specifically around data loading, and also workspace session sharing with those 2 apps. So with the data loading, you helped us understand, really, once you've got an understanding of your data and where you want it to go and how it's going to be used, you can create a data load definition. You can then use that data load definition by just using the data load widget into a page. You can use that a number of times and share it across the application via different forms. You showed us using it in the simple form first off, and then you showed us what was possible. We're using some sort of lookup relational connection. And then you also showed us how we could do something a little bit more, what you could say stepwise with it, where I'm loading data into a transition area. It gives me an opportunity to check and then do the allocation or blending or merging. Great session, Chris. And thank you for suggesting we actually hear from you on what you've learned about with data loading on Thursdays with Franco.